Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 86, we sit down with Tara Smith, a reporter for Newsday, as she shares her rich ancestry and memories of growing up on the North Fork. Tara takes us through her school years, the pivotal decision to pursue journalism, and her journey back to Long Island after college. From her early career at the Long Island Advance and the Suffolk Times to becoming a reporter at Newsday, Tara reflects on the stories she's most proud of and the evolving challenges facing today's news media. We also dive into her hopes for the future of the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 86 with Tara Smith. This episode was recorded June 28th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Christopher, for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I enjoy listening to it, so it's nice to be in the room.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to just start off with a brief introduction where you were born and raised.
Yeah, I was born at Southampton Hospital, and I grew up in Riverhead, and I still live there today.
And in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go on both your parents' side?
So I know a little bit more about the specifics on my dad's side. My cousin Tim has done a trove of research, and he's compiled it into, we call it the book. Mm-hmm. And he's done a lot of digging in our ancestry. So on my dad's side, if you go back far enough, probably my great grandparents, you can find that they were born in Ireland, in the Cork, Limerick area. So that's kind of cool that we have that a geographical area to trace back to. Mm-hmm. And then when you look at their children, they were born and raised in New York City. So I guess in the 1850s, they immigrated like many Irish Americans over to New York. And that's kind of where the roots started on my dad's side. And that's more of my paternal grandmother's side. Probably a little bit more research to do on his dad's side. They've got like some German and French ancestry too, but it's mainly Irish. And then my mom's side, I'm really curious about. My mom is an immigrant from the Philippines. Mm-hmm. So my uncle, he was sort of the family historian on that side. He passed away about 1.5 years ago, and he was the guy you would go to for all of the family lore and had these great stories. But unfortunately, a lot of that kind of passed on with him. So we'd love to get some records. And that's the hard part, right? Being 3,000 miles away and not able to look into it as much. But there's definitely some Spanish roots there, just from the colonial influence of Spain over 300 years. And so she's definitely got some ancestors there. But I'd be curious to know if we could, kind of find any more specifics.
Mm-hmm. And did you get to meet any of your grandparents on both sides?
Yeah, I met just my grandmothers on each side. My grandma Mary on my dad's side, she lived to be 94, 95, and she lived in Rockville Center for most of her life. And so my whole childhood, have really nice memories of spending time with her. And I was also really lucky to meet my mom's mom, who also lived to be in her mid-90s, my grandma Andrea, and she was great. We got got to meet her on trips to the Philippines as kids. She never made it over here for a visit. My mom's dad actually got to visit before I was born, or maybe I was a baby, so I don't quite remember him. But I feel lucky that I got to meet my grandma on those trips back home.
And so, did your dad grow up in Rockville Center area where your grandma was?
He did. My grandparents, his parents met in the city, lived in Queens for a little bit, and then he was 2 or 3 when they moved out to Rockville Center. And he graduated from Southside High School, and then he joined the Marines. And when he got back, he enrolled in journalism classes at Hofstra University. And he never graduated, but he actually also worked at Newsday for his career.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And do you know what his parents did for work?
His dad was an attorney. I'm not quite sure what area of law, he practiced in, but he was an attorney. And then my grandmother stayed home. She raised my dad and his 2 brothers.
And for your mom's side, where did she grow up?
So my mom grew up in the Philippines. She came over to the States in the 1980s. So she was in her 20s, and she came over to work as a nurse, as many Filipino immigrants do. But up until then, she studied nursing in the Philippines, and her dad was also in the field. He was a World War II veteran, and so he served in the Philippine Army, as an ally of the United States, and he was a medic in the field. And then my grandmother raised 8 kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did your mom say how the opportunity kind of came about to move over here, or because you said that was that more common at that time, even for people in that field to move to the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. My mom's older sister, my Aunt Gloria, she was the first one to immigrate. She's just a couple years older than my mom, and I think once she came over, she actually came to Canada, and she lives right across the border from Detroit, and she was a nurse in Detroit for 35 years. So she would cross the border every day to work. So it's kind of interesting. But when my mom originally came here, she first went to Detroit, stayed with my aunt, and then, wanted to see New York, the Big Apple, and came over to New York. She lived in Queens with some cousins of hers, worked as a nurse, and slowly made her way east.
And then how did your parents meet?
My parents met, they were working in the same building. My mom was working in public health at the county center in Hauppauge, and I guess she just met my dad, who was a reporter, and he would be hanging around and getting stories. And they kind of met, they had a connection, and it was a second marriage for both of them. So, they each had families before they met.
Okay. And coming more towards you grew up in Riverhead. How did they end up? Because were they living further west at that time? How did they decide to move?
Yeah, their first place was actually in Patchogue, and they lived kind of down by the bay there. And I can't remember exactly why they kind of settled on Riverhead. My dad had been covering the courts in Riverhead. That was his beat. And I think he just fell in love with the area. It was much more rural than it is today, but it still has that charm. And I think he was just really drawn to that and the water and all the farms.
And now for you, did you have any siblings growing up in your household?
I did, yeah. I have an older brother.
Okay. And how was it for you how would you describe, I guess even it could be more as a child growing up in your neighborhood in Riverhead, how would you describe the area?
It was much different than it is today.
Yeah.
My childhood home was neighbored on 3 sides by farmland, and there had been a farm stand, walking distance from our house in those days. So it was really magical to grow up, not in a farming family, but, very close to a farm. And we were always outdoors and, running through the fields and, picking potatoes and, kind of getting the excess harvest. And it was really great, the farmer that lived next to us. And most of that land is still farmed. It's just a sod farm now instead of a potato farm. And then there have been some other houses built around us.
Yeah. And you mentioned playing in the farm areas, but were there any other childhood activities that you would do, say, within the town or outside when you got out of school?
Yeah, I mean, I loved being outdoors and yeah, playing outside, riding my bike. I also played the violin. That was kind of a school activity. Also played outside of school. I would do, pit orchestras for the North Fork Community Theater. Every summer they would do like a youth production.
Yes.
And so growing up when I was like a teenager, I spent a lot of summers there in the pit.
Mm-hmm. And now, moving towards school, how was that experience for you? Did you go all through Riverhead School District, elementary, middle school, high school?
Yeah, I started kindergarten at Aquabog Elementary and graduated from Riverhead in 2011. And it was a great school district. It was there were lots of opportunities and it was diverse. You got to meet a lot of people and it was a big school.
Did you gravitate towards any specific subjects or core classes that you enjoyed over that time?
I was that kid that was interested in every single subject, and I kind of got good grades across the board and, never really, it was so hard for me to pick a favorite class. I was just as excited about my physics class as I was about, my English classes. But I think I definitely did gravitate a little bit more towards those English classes and writing, in particular.
Did you have any role models or teachers that were important, say, within high school? Or you became interested in certain areas that you might not have expected, subject-wise?
So I had so many great role models. When I think back to my teachers, I was very lucky, starting in elementary school, all the way up to high school. I had an English teacher who really worked with me on writing. I think she sensed that I had an interest in it and, joined like the literary magazine club and, started writing for that. My high school didn't have a newspaper. So, I didn't get to really learn about journalism aside from like my family experience, more seriously or more formally until college.
Now, did you know what you wanted to do coming out of high school?
I thought I did. When I enrolled in college at Arcadia University, which is a small college in Glenside, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia, I declared my major as being international studies and political science. So I probably envisioned myself negotiating peace treaties or something like that. And I quickly realized that was not going to be for me. And I took a journalism class my second semester. I was lucky enough to study abroad in London. And it was a very introductory class, but the professor was... she had serious chops and she was writing for The Guardian and, she had us do, some reporting, some man in the street and, do a story about, what are people talking about on campus? That sort of thing, which was a nice way to get to know journalism and reporting. But she also took us to The Guardian and to the BBC and we got a nice look at some of those larger organizations. And I think I came back the following fall and switched majors.
And after college, did you want to stay on Long Island or were you thinking of other areas that you wanted to work within journalism? Yeah,
I was looking to stay in Philly for a little bit. I had an internship at a radio station that I really loved. It was an iHeartMedia station, one that I just kind of liked listening to as a college student. And I had an internship there, and I thought I might try to look for a job there, but the reality of student loans kicking in kind of settled in. And so I moved back home after college, and just started applying at local places. And in the meantime, I was working at a winery locally to, get the bills paid.
Mm-hmm.
And I also in college had an internship at the Shelter Island Reporter. So I had some contacts with Times Review Media Group out here.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't get my first journalism job until I guess I was a year out of college, and I was hired by the Long Island Advance, which covers the South Shore of Long Island, and they're based in Patchogue.
And how long did you work there before moving to the Suffolk Times?
I was there for about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did the opportunity come about to come to the Suffolk Times?
So I always kept in touch with the editors at the Suffolk Times, mm-hmm. and a couple times over the years when I was working at the Advance, there would be some openings, and they'd say, "Hey, come in and let's talk about this." And sometimes the timing just wasn't right, and mm-hmm. So in 2018, they had an opening come up, and I took it. I think I just saw an opportunity to work on a bigger team, in a little bit bigger of a newsroom. When I was at the Advance, it was a great paper. It was also a weekly. It was really me and an editor. Mm-hmm. So it was very small, but a great place to learn and get in the field and kind of get in the swing of things. But I think it prepared me well to start at the Suffolk Times, where I covered primarily Southold.
Mm. And your time at the Suffolk Times, what would you mentioned Southold, but were there any stories that you enjoyed writing at that time that were important to you?
So when I was at the Suffolk Times, I had the opportunity to report on some bigger stories, on some more regional issues, right? Like hiring and how hard it was, in the season, right, for mm-hmm. people to find employees. And, that really ties into the housing crisis and that sort of thing. And also a lot of environmental stories that are hugely important to this area as we, think about climate change. There's probably one assignment that I'll never forget was the Peconic Baykeeper and a local pilot were going up in his little Cessna to mm-hmm. look at the high tides. There was supposed to be a king tide, with the full moon. And they invited me along, and that was kind of a nerve-wracking experience to be up in a plane. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it was just a cool assignment to be up there and to really see, flooding that was super dramatic, especially low-lying areas the further east you go, out towards Orient and mm-hmm. On the South Shore.
Mm-hmm. And even before the opportunity came about for Newsday, even that time working at the Suffolk Times, it gave you the opportunity to even get to know the community on the North Fork more. And was that the overall time at the Suffolk Times, was that a good experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a really great team, and I think we did some important work locally. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, I got to know, particularly in Southold, the community way better than I had going into it. Mm-hmm. Growing up in Riverhead, of course, Southold, and I'd been to Greenport before, but you don't really understand why Southold is the way Southold is, or, kind of the history of Greenport. And you kind of start to understand on a deeper level what people who live here full time care about.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you at the Suffolk Times?
I worked at the Suffolk Times for almost 5 years. So 2018 to May of last year.
And then how did the opportunity come about to become a reporter for Newsday?
So Newsday came about, I had seen that they were hiring, and kind of growing their newsroom. And I thought that was really exciting, especially in light of, the scary headlines you see at other, large newspapers around the country. And they were looking to grow their towns team, which is the team that I work on. But I went in, I did some interviews, a couple rounds and a test assignment, and started last May, and I've really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. It was just a really great opportunity, and also having that connection with, my dad working there. Mm-hmm. I almost didn't intend to end up there, but it's amazing, and almost feels like carrying his legacy a little bit. But also I've met a lot of people who kind of still remember him, or maybe even worked with him, and they've got some great stories to tell. Even some sources that I still call up today who remember him from the courts. It's just really neat to get those stories. A lot of them involve the Rendezvous Bar in Riverhead. So it was a different time. It was a different time, reporting in those days. But it's nice to get those stories from people.
Definitely. And so you've been at Newsday for over a year now. Could you walk us through what a typical day looks like for you? Obviously, it might vary day by day, but
yeah, absolutely. Every day is a little different, and I think that's one of the exciting things about being a reporter is, something might come up and you kind of have to pivot and maybe hop on a story. But usually I'm checking in on the towns that I cover, so I do cover Riverhead and Southold towns, and of course Greenport Village. And so a lot of times it's catching up on government meetings and seeing if there's anything kind of happening there. Mm-hmm. I try to, as best I can, have days where I'm working in the field, reporting, covering things live, and setting myself up to then have days dedicated to writing, which usually I can get done just in the office or working from home.
Mm-hmm. And can you share some other behind-the-scenes insights into covering local news on Long Island?
Yeah, you've got to really keep an eye on town officials and the decisions that are being made at town hall, and also communicate that to people in a way that's interesting or useful. These are the decisions that, look, people talk all the time about Washington and national politics, and that dominates a lot of conversations. But the decisions that are made in town and village halls are ones that really impact people's day to day, and how much property taxes they pay, or how they get rid of their trash in their households, or how they get a beach sticker. So, really the kind of simple things that, really do matter to people. So I think trying to think like those readers and think, what are they looking for? Okay, the town did this. How does this impact its residents? So really, as a reporter, you're trying to think like your readers and think like Long Islanders. And luckily, we are also Long Islanders. We also live here, and so I think there's that connection. And then just making sure that you're covering the important things outside of town hall and in the community as well, because there are a lot of great groups and other initiatives that are also helping to improve the life of Long Islanders.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is the most challenging part of your job?
I think now it's just that I cover such a wide area, right? Riverhead to Southold. There's a lot going on. And so, you kind of have to be everywhere at once. But you have to keep tabs on so many different things. And it could be hard to keep up with that. Yeah.
I mean, working just within Southold, and then now you're expanded to that whole almost region.
Yeah.
Just prioritizing different stories. And has that come up quite frequently where you have to, there might be this other interesting story, but then you have to prioritize something that might have been going on or just happened, and you have to drop everything that you were doing on that one story and come up with something for this new pressing issue?
Sure, yeah, that comes up sometimes where you just have to refocus on something else. Maybe it's more timely or, more pressing, that you have to kind of get out sooner than you would on, let's say a feature, a profile you're doing on someone that, maybe isn't as newsy, but still worth telling. So it's nice to have those stories kind of cooking behind the scenes, that you can hop back into once you're off deadline on the other thing.
Mm-hmm. And also, I was curious, you have to report on a wide range of topics and issues, but are there any topics that you really enjoy writing about more? Not that you have to compare it more than others, because you have to write about a wide range of things, but ones that you really enjoy writing about.
Yeah, I think stories that get at the character of the area. So that can include coverage of the environment and issues that are, maybe threaten water quality or, just the natural beauty. When I can talk about farming and agriculture and the area's history, that's always kind of nice because I think it means a lot to so many people. Mm-hmm. And just tell the stories of, sort of regular people who live out here, and everyone may know, but maybe you don't know their story. And so to bring that to a bigger audience than just people who live out here or work out here, is really sort of a unique honor, really, to tell those stories and bring them to all of Long Island, right? When you think of who's reading Newsday.
Mm-hmm. And obviously things have changed within journalism over the years, and I don't know if you would say even with your time, even starting from then to now, but could you talk a little bit about the impact of social media on local news reporting, and has that changed? Even just I've talked about just even misinformation, but also just using social media as a form to even get a wider readership.
Social media is one of those double-edged swords, right? It's a tool, and I think I do, and a lot of reporters use it to find sources or keep up with what people in their communities that they cover are talking about. Mm-hmm. So it can be hugely important, just to make sure that you do have that connection. And if you're not able to be walking on the street or in a local coffee shop, that doesn't replace that totally, but social media helps you see those kind of conversations that are happening. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's also made being a journalist a little bit more challenging because people can write anything on social media. So that doesn't change the fact that as a reporter, you've got to verify where the information's coming from. Is it true? Mm-hmm. So of course, it's definitely been an aid in the spread of misinformation. And, it's been really hard, and people hit share and repost things without thinking about the source or where they came from. And that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. But I think, it can be used also to improve your reporting and as a tool as well.
Yes. And
well, you also kind of asked how it's changed since like maybe my first year as a reporter. So thinking back, that was 2016. And even things like just the technology that's available. Like when I first was a reporter, I had my old school voice recorder that I would do all my interviews on, and it was great. It has a USB, it goes right into your laptop. And I would spend so much time transcribing interviews and, finding the good quotes and making sure all the information was right. And now I use Otter, which is an AI recorder service, and it's an app right on your phone, and it helps you transcribe interviews kind of in real time. And it's a huge aid. It saves me so much time. But then it's, kind of the existential question of AI in general and how that's impacting all of us. But especially, journalism. And when you talk about misinformation, I think it can have, again, like in some areas it can help. And in some areas it's something to watch out for.
Yeah. And Do you also do a lot of investigative journalism within your reporting? And were there any memorable pieces that you've worked on?
Investigative reporting is so important. I think it's it goes really beyond surface level, here's what happened and the who, what, where, when, why. And so I do submit, I try to foil for, documents and different things that might help or might lead to stories in the future. So I think that's an important thing to do. Someone once told me, I can't remember who, but one of my journalism mentors along the way said, good reporters should put like one Freedom of Information request in per day. So I don't think I quite meet that, but I try to do, once a week or something to try to get, just dig a little deeper on things. And, Newsday has an investigations team that's primarily all they work on is these larger investigative pieces. And so, that's definitely something I want to explore more and, throughout my career, do more of those pieces.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to ask more about I think I've asked this to other journalists too, just about how you provide the news. And we've talked about misinformation, but as a journalist, what are your views on how you would convey the story, and in terms of even if there are biases within people, and are you trying to provide it in a neutral way or just within a way that people can decide for themselves if it's more of a hotly debated topic?
You have to. Yeah, that's paramount. You have to take yourself out of it if you have, personal views, but you also have to consider, the people you're quoting, you're giving that power to, when you quote someone in a story. So I think, just making sure that's balanced, if you have a few voices in a story. So that's key, just making sure that you're presenting it in the most straightforward way, no matter what the issue is.
Mm-hmm. And also related to that, how do you balance between informing the public and respecting privacy when reporting on maybe it's not like a sensitive issue?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, do no harm and making sure that you're sticking to the facts. And, of course, you want to capture, if it's a story that does have high emotions, you want to get at that, but of course you want to respect your sources and make sure that you're not putting them at risk or putting them in an uncomfortable spot. So I think building that trust up with your sources is hugely important, a big part of what we do. So making sure that they trust you and can talk to you and of course like go over any concerns and trying to address those.
Mm-hmm. And over your time reporting, have you seen, just even with yourself or even when you've talked with other people in the area, just some common misconceptions of people might have of Long Island?
Oh, that's a good one. Long Island, I mean, there are so many misconceptions about Long Island, but reporting on the East End and living here, honestly, I think one of the misconceptions is that we're all wealthy and we're all, there's this affluence in this area and, there's definitely money here, and I think, and I try to call attention to this in stories, but there's also a housing crisis and an affordability crisis, really all over Long Island, but it's particularly in the spotlight on the East End just because of, the population shifts and, a lot of the summer houses and that sort of thing. So that, presents a real challenge for locals, people who might be working to make a living here or stay here. And so I think that is something that sometimes people are kind of surprised by, just to hear that there's this affordability crisis or, groups like CAST that work with so many people in the town of Southold. And you think, wait, but Southold is, and so there are misconceptions there about who lives in the town or, that kind of thing. And so I think, when you do stories about housing or initiatives or, different things that people are trying to work on to improve that, brings attention to it, and also lets people know that that this is a problem here.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's important because I think you do get people that, whether it's, I mean, we obviously have tourists that come out here and new people that move to the area, but
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays more so it can become invisible with not recognizing a lot of the people that might be underserved, or
Sure.
they might look at the prices of the housing and say, well, that to them, to their perspective, it might seem affordable, but we have a lot of other people out here that are struggling, and I think that's something that I think we are dealing with throughout Long Island and the country.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I can think of. And really, that probably does extend to all of Long Island. I just remember, being at college and, meeting people who, maybe had those kinds of ideas about Long Island, and, it's not always the case. So.
Yeah. I asked about the Suffolk Times, but do you have any stories that you're really proud of that you've worked on with Newsday that come to mind?
Sure. So recently I had the opportunity to do a feature on Freddie the Cobbler, who ran a cobbler shop in Riverhead for 50 years, which is kind of mind-blowing. He opened the shop as a 19-year-old in the 70s and worked, all the way, he's in his 70s now. And he's definitely earned his retirement. But, I spent a day in his shop, and I mean, he was busy, had a line out the door, and, people kind of hearing about him closing and bringing in their shoes or bags for those last minute repairs. It was great to tell his story. And I think that goes kind of in line with what I was saying earlier about, the importance of telling those stories. And, it's a trade that's gone away, and it's a nostalgia thing for a lot of people on the East End. He was the last one left. So I love doing profile pieces like that. I think, it kind of really gets at the heart of the area or of a community. So stories like that are really nice.
But I think that's a really wonderful story, because it is, if it's a dying art in a way, I think it's something that people might do, but you don't see it as much. There's not as many of those shops anymore. So
it's one of those trades where you learn from a mentor, or you learn by doing an apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. And, there's maybe no school program for those kinds of trades. So, I think as time went on, he even told me he had trouble finding people who were, willing to put in that work, or, the time to learn all the different tools and machines and repairs. So, I think a lot of people see it as a dying art, and also things just aren't made the same anymore. So, we're if something breaks, you kind of just throw it away and, maybe order something new on Amazon or something. Yeah. We just have a different consumer culture. So that was a fun one. And, I think stories, on the flip side, it's more seriously, when I can do stories on water quality, or, also in Riverhead, there's a neighborhood of homes which have polluted water, from the EPCAL site. And, there's been a big fight, big advocacy effort to get them hooked up to clean public water, and that's moving ahead. So reporting on issues like that, I think, are important. Just did a story along with some of my colleagues just a couple months ago on, new EPA limits for PFAS in water. So I think being able to take something like that, which is a national, has national impacts, and it's a federal decision, but will really have an impact here locally. I think those are also important stories to be covering.
Absolutely. And you mentioned how some things have changed over your time, but how do you see the future of journalism evolving, especially as we move into, well, we're already kind of in the digital age, but moving into more AI and a lot of other places where people are gathering their news from other sources, and just, yeah, how do you see that evolving in the future and with some of these other challenges coming forward in the media landscape?
I think it's going to be hugely important to consider where you're getting your news. I mean, we have this huge menu of options right now, and it's kind of coming at you from all angles, right? On social media, the traditional streams of, newspapers and TV news or radio, but, any social media app, and of course, like AI sites and that kind of thing. So it's always going to be important to have a trusted source, reporting your news. But I think it's going to be, even more digital than it is today. I think it's, even thinking of how I consume my news, it's a lot more video content and a lot more emerging types of media, right? Podcasts and that kind of thing. So I think it's important to embrace those kinds of technologies, and, you can't keep up with everything as it comes out, but I think overall it does help you reach maybe a bigger audience, maybe a younger audience. I think for people who are, maybe teenagers or young people, teaching them, how to responsibly, find their news is something I'm really passionate about.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of people that might be starting out in the field or even in high school that are interested in journalism, what advice would you give to someone looking to work on Long Island, wanting to become a journalist?
I would tell them to just stay curious, keep that curiosity, nurture it, keep asking questions, and pay attention to what's kind of going on around you. I think that that's almost like an innate thing of journalists, right? We're all curious people and, are drawn to reporting because of that. But, I would tell them to, pay attention to the news, but also be flexible, embrace new technologies, learn, I think it always will come back to your skills as a writer and as a reporter, asking the right questions or being out in the field and, experiencing things. So I think that those are really important skills to have. But, the more you can use technology, social media, that kind of thing, I think will only help you in the future as things keep evolving.
Yes. And for your career, do you see yourself staying at Newsday, or were there any other goals or ideas that you had in mind down the road?
Yeah, I'm loving Newsday, and I hope to be here for, to really make a career here. And, that's not to say, future opportunities might come up. But I think, one thing that excites me is Newsday is kind of growing and expanding teams, internally, and there's a lot of opportunities just within the company itself. And it's been really great to get to know the other reporters, who have all of these decades of experience, and you can really lean on them for, if you kind of need some guidance or need some help navigating, how do I go about this? And so that's been a really great resource to have, and I feel really lucky. And so I think, it's an inspiring place, and I think, it would be nice to, find that beat, maybe that takes you out of town government a little, but, for now, I like where I am.
And would you want to keep reporting on the North Fork? There's still a special connection there. You're open to other possibilities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I got really lucky when they asked me if I would cover the North Fork, because I kind of already had the historical kind of context and understood a lot of the issues that I would be reporting on. Already knew a lot of people and had those connections. But, even when I spend time out here now, I'm, every day I meet someone new, and that's really great, because there's always kind of more to learn and, more stories to be told. But I think, even jumping over to another town, would be like, there would be a little bit of a learning curve, but you kind of start to see there are common threads, that other towns have, with the East End or just Long Island in general. A lot of the concerns are the same, right? Over taxes or the environment or development. No matter where you go, you're going to kind of run into that just being on an island. But again, like the East End, we do have these kind of more unique situations. So that's nice too. But yeah, one day I might be covering a different town or different level of government. So yeah, open to that. But for now, I feel super fortunate to be out here reporting still.
And separate from journalism and your work, just growing up in Riverhead and living out here over this time period, what have you enjoyed most about your experience in living out here?
It's kind of funny. Like I didn't think I would end up back here. You kind of, you turn 18 and you're off to college and you think, I need to get out of here. And it's great. I kind of saw the world, and I think I did a summer in Philly, and I was like, wait, it's an hour to get to the beach. And that was an immediate no for me.
Yeah.
So I do think that's one of the reasons that pulled me back was I love the water. I love the beach, to be closer to family, but it's also just a really special place, having all these working farms and having, just an abundance of people who, work on the land and have this respect for the land. It's a unique thing, and you're not going to find that everywhere. So I think that's kind of part of the draw for me and what's kept me here. And the people, the people out here are hardworking and really interesting. And I think Long Islanders are hilarious. We have, it's a really special place.
Yes. And in terms of Riverhead, you mentioned that it has changed, and even with some of the farmlands, but would you say the area has improved in some ways? And obviously there are still challenges that specifically Riverhead is facing. But I was just curious what your thoughts might be on your time growing up there and then seeing it now, and what you might hope for the future of Riverhead.
I guess it depends on how you define progress.
Yes.
But Riverhead, I mean, no, it's come a long way. I mean, there's a huge amount of development. And it's funny because a lot of times, like, people who live kind of further east or out here in Southold, a lot of people point to Riverhead as like, well, we don't want that to happen. And specifically things like Route 58, which has, traffic and big box stores. And so it's funny because it is one region, right? Everyone thinks of the North Fork, and people will debate where that actually starts, which is kind of funny. But if you do count Riverhead in that, it is one region. But I think it's an important economic driver, right, for the whole East End to have, that hub of shops and commerce and things for not only the North Fork, but the South Fork too, with people passing through to get out there. One thing that I've done so many stories on, both at Newsday and when I was at the Suffolk Times, Riverhead News Review, had to do with downtown revitalization. And that has been in the works. That has been a goal for probably my whole lifetime. I remember as a kid, it was kind of, I have some memories of being downtown, particularly when like Sweezy's was open. That was a big department store. And I think really, once that closed and places like Tanger opened and Route 58 started to get developed, it changed everything for downtown. And, that's not unique to just Riverhead. I think a lot of small towns have had similar experiences, but I think people want that downtown feeling back. They want to be able to park and, grab a coffee at a local coffee shop and, walk and have shops. And it's nice to have a thriving downtown. So they're closer than ever. I just wrote last week, the town got word that they are getting a huge $24 million grant from the federal government that will help in some of the revitalization projects that are have been ideas for a long time, but the challenge was always, how are we going to pay for it? So that was a nice, bit of news last Friday to get to report on. And so it's after kind of reporting and seeing the whole process of someone has an idea and, to now being able to see it kind of come to fruition. A lot of things are still in the works and they've got a ways to go, but that's always nice when you can see a project throughout that whole process.
And I think they're even talking about the transportation hub with the Long Island Railroad and revitalizing that area. And you've seen some of the new apartments or condos that have popped up that were 5-6 stories. But I've also heard people say that they're building these new condos, but they're also, a lot of the locals can't afford to stay in there. Do you know if are they working on anything to even bring affordable housing to downtown Riverhead?
Yeah, I think, some of the newer projects that I've been reporting on lately tend to be market rate, and the official conversations are that there's demand for it. A lot of town officials will point to the hospital, Peconic Bay Medical Center, as that's probably one of the biggest employers in the town. So I think that might be some kind of justification for that. But again, when you talk about affordability, there are affordable apartments. Some of the earlier apartment buildings that went up in downtown Riverhead were, more affordable. But I think, one of the goals that the town's been trying to do is have a mix of development. So, I think for a lot of the people who have lived in Riverhead for a long time, it can be a little jarring to see a 5-story building go up. And, that's one of the things where, when you're reporting, you're trying to get to to the heart of, okay, there's these new apartments going up, and also kind of capture that, do people want this, or, what are the concerns, and some of the concerns that I've heard from people who live in Riverhead and in the downtown area are, how is this going to impact, the environment, of course, but also like infrastructure and, different resources and the school district, things like that. So I think, all good things to consider when you have new development in the works.
Definitely. And just looking towards the future for the North Fork region as a whole, what would you hope for the North Fork and its community down the line? What would you hope to see?
I think some of the big issues that are going to be, have to get addressed and have started to really are, like we talked about, affordability and housing. I think that's going to be, if not the defining kind of issue of the time. And that goes hand in hand with preservation, right? Because a lot of times people are saying, well, where are they going to put, affordable housing or new housing in general? So working out, how those issues kind of work together. But preservation of the environment, of farmland, of, the waterways out here, the Peconic Bay, I think that's also going to be a big issue to deal with, in the face of things like climate change and more intense flooding and all of those things. So I hope the North Fork will thrive through that. And
usually I ask at the end if there was anything else you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
I think we covered everything.
So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and really all the wonderful work you're doing for the North Fork and bringing important stories to the forefront of our conversation that need to continue to be told. So I want to thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 86 with Tara Smith. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.